This is going to be an informal conversation with these brilliant ladies I've invited on today. I'm assuming many of you are coming here because the idea of being in an inflection point or pivotal life stage may have resonated a bit. I'd first like to introduce the ladies who are here with me today to give you a little bit of background. And then I asked each of them to share a lesson learned with me. My request for a birthday present was, these are women who I admire and respect. And as I've been thinking about turning 50, it's been a couple of years of reflection and thinking a bit about where am I now and where would I like to go? And I know I'm not isolated in feeling that way. So my hope for today was to ask each of these brilliant women what they've been learning. And it's not about turning 50 for all of us. We're not all the same age, but what they've been learning at a pivotal moment in their life, and share that with me and with us so we can have a discussion about those lessons learned. So that was my request for today. And to start, before I ask them their lessons learned, I'd like to just do some very quick introductions. And again, ladies, thank you so much for coming. This is a really interesting mix of perspectives. I've thought about this for my birthday. Kyle Soucy and Diana DeMarco Brown, we've known each other since, I describe it as, we've known each other since we were kids. We're going on, for all of us, 20 plus years. And we've had different connections and relationships along the way. We met in our 20s, I believe, and we were colleagues in the UX space, but we've connected at different points along those years. So a couple of the women on this panel I've known for decades. I also invited Mary Noone and Stephanie Gerber Wilson, who are here, who I've met more recently in the past couple of years, and we've connected in both a work capacity, but also become friends and connected in that way. I really wanted to have a mix of people I have known for a very long time and connected with, and people I've known who are more recent, meeting me at a different stage. I'm thrilled with the mix. For those of you, some of you may know some of our panelists, but Kyle Soucy, I'll start with you. I mentioned we've known each other for years and years. Kyle is considered a premier UX research leader in the UX space. She's had a successful consultancy for 20 years now. Her consultancy is Usable Interface. She's a go-to for me to hear about how to run a business and thrive for your consultancy. Kyle also is a podcast producer and host. She runs her own podcast, UX Consultants Lounge. Kyle, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for the very nice introduction. I'm really blushing, so it's hard to hear, but thank you.
Of course. Diana, on to you. I still remember when we met, and it was like in an office where we both were acting like we were the rock stars of the place, and we were just the young kids in the UX world. What's really exciting to see, Diana DeMarco Brown is a pioneer in the UX and tech space. She is also a person I go to who just always tells it like it is. She's a voice of reason. She's a brilliant mind in the UX space. She's also, and she doesn't mention this quite a bit, she's the author of an amazing book called Agile User Experience Design. And I'm thrilled to have you here, Diana. Thank you.
Good to be here.
And Stephanie, I mentioned I met Stephanie Gerber Wilson more recently. We connected a little over a year ago, maybe a little bit longer now. Stephanie Gerber Wilson is someone I turn to in terms of seeing you're a rock star, you're brilliant, and seeing the way you've navigated your career and going to different paths. Stephanie is the host of her own podcast as well, Freedom Over Fascism, which I listen to every single week. It's fantastic. She is also she wears many different hats, but she's also an amazing leadership coach, focusing on working with women and lifting women up. Stephanie, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting and really honored.
Thank you. And Mary, last but not least at all, Mary Noone, we've also known each other for a little over a year now. And back to the things I've learned. So Mary is a political campaign strategist and is doing amazing work in this space. Mary is doing work with political candidates to ramp up their brand strategy. And what I love, okay, here's my leaning. Mary is also working to lift up female candidates and give them the skill set and tools they need to run effectively. Mary's a brilliant mind in the political space. I'm thrilled you're here. I've learned so much from you. So thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here because with this invite, it's also challenged me to reflect. And I think that's also such a good thing at any stage of your life is take a moment to self-reflect. So this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So to start, now that I've had a chance to introduce you all, and I can't tell you, I have goosebumps. I can't thank you enough for being here. This is really lovely for me. A little hidden secret for the attendees, and it's a little tidbit about what I'll be sharing when I talk about lessons learned. I invited these women as part of growth on my part in terms of a lesson I've learned during this period of reflection. And what I mean by that is that in my career and in my life, I've gotten very good at going it alone in many ways, running my own business on my own, having a child and baby as a single mom by choice on my own. There's a big part of my identity that's been wrapped up around doing things on my own. My big lesson learned, and thanks to these women, the friendships we've cultivated, I don't want to do it alone anymore. My MO is coming into a session like this and teaching on my own and presenting. And as I've talked more with these women and as I've reflected more over the last couple of years, that's really hard. And I don't want to shoulder that responsibility anymore. So when I thought about lessons learned, what is most uplifting for me is not me hearing from myself about what I've reflected on. Instead, I want to not just turn to these women, but connect with others, many others, not just women, all people, to start sharing more and communicating more. And admittedly, this is growth for me and expansion. These ladies know it's not something that always comes easily to me, but this was my lesson learned. How can I rely on others and also learn and grow? So this session today is part of that. It's part of my growth. So that was my little hidden secret. So with that, I'll stay quiet because I really love to learn from all of you. To start, the way we're going to run this session, I've asked, as I mentioned, I asked these brilliant ladies to come up with 1 or 2 lessons learned that they've really thought about and has resonated with them. I'm going to go around and give the platform to each of you to share a little bit about what you'd like to share with me and with all of the attendees. So to start, Kyle, are you up with going first and
Sure.
talking about a life inflection point and
Yep.
what you'd like to share? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I want to start by just thanking you for not only inviting us to do this, but just inviting everybody in to learn from one another, because we're all going to get so much out of this. And I think that's a wonderful gift that not only you're giving yourself, but you're giving all of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah. All right. Like Mary mentioned, I thought this was a wonderful exercise in getting us to reflect. And it was great. It was really fun to think back on what lessons I've learned with different, inflection points in my life. Becoming a mother almost 15 years ago just changed my world completely. How couldn't it? How can it? Right? I started my business 5 years prior to having children, and it changed everything in how I do my work. It had to, right? I couldn't continue on the same path I was on and successfully raise 2 human beings. There would be no way. And becoming a mother really meant that I had to do a much better job at protecting my time. And I'm naturally a people pleaser, so it's not in my nature to do this. But what I recognized when juggling a lot of different roles, a lot more work and responsibility, that there's not a whole lot of joy in people pleasing when you get taken advantage of, or if you end up sacrificing a lot in order to please others. And in that case, it was family time and time that was precious to me. So over the years, I've become much more comfortable in finding my voice and becoming more assertive. And really, I learned to say something with the help of my husband. I think he really coined this phrase very well and got me comfortable with saying it. but just learning to say, that doesn't work for me, and being okay with that, and just putting that out there, and knowing that I am not an uncaring bitch when I say that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work for me. That has been a huge growth. I think when you mentioned, Christine, meeting in our 20s, and I think of that person, I didn't have it in me to say those words then. I've changed, I think, a lot, and for the better, and partly in just being able to recognize, respect, and advocate for my boundaries. And it's just been so important. The other lesson I had was really, and I can't tie this lesson to an inflection point. I really thought about it. I'm like, where did this come from? Or what was the turning point where this became a thing? I don't really know, but I know that 8 to 10 years ago, I decided that I'm just no longer letting other people's definition of success define my own success. So whether it's growing the headcount of my business, getting a certain role, a raise, getting a PhD, owning a second home, whatever it is that my colleagues, my friends, family, or neighbors are doing does not define my roadmap and define my success. I don't know what it was, but I just realized that I'm the one writing my story. I own my narrative, and really just let go a lot of external validation. And even though Twitter is dead for most of us now, I think back to my early years in my career and how I lived on it. And it was just all about getting that validation of just followers and retweets and this and that. And it's just like letting that go and just really not caring so much. And I don't know what it is that got me to that point. I think a lot of us have read Mark Manson's book, The Subtle
Don't
Art
give a,
of
yeah.
Not Giving a yeah.
Yeah.
I took a lot from that. I wouldn't say that was the turning point, but he talks a lot about success, and that a lot of people have this illusion that success is being carefree and not having any problems. And we all know that's a bunch of BS. We all have problems in life, no matter how much money we have or how much success we have. And really, success is just about choosing better problems that are meaningful to you, that align with your values. And that's what I'm focusing on now, just trying to figure out what that is, but also letting go of that, constantly seeking the comfort, the positivity, and letting that go. So
Yeah.
those were two major lessons for me.
Thank you. Thank you. I had a couple of questions for you, Kyle, because you're right. We met in our 20s. One thing I didn't mention about this panel is we are all moms. And Kyle, when you and I met, we hadn't had our children yet. And there's a couple of things that struck me here, thinking about your definition of success and what society says success is. It really resonates with me that you at now this stage are defining what success means to you and being able to block out a little bit about what success means to others. I am trying to get there, and I still struggle. I'd be curious in terms of how you've come into your own and really focused on what you view as success versus keeping out those societal expectations. The example I think of is that since I've become a mom, I think I've become so much more empathetic, so much better at my work. I take much more care when I'm working with teammates and colleagues to be conscious of their perspective. I've learned so much. I haven't felt like that hat of being a mom is something that necessarily all people have appreciated that I can bring to work. So long story short, is there a way you eventually got to the point where you focus more on your definition of success versus others? And how did you get there?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. I think it helped for me, like you mentioned. I don't think you have to be a mother to get to this point. Some people get there on their own. For me, having kids helped me be less self-centered when it came to business. That consumed me completely. I lived and breathed my work. I had no really other distractions in life, so I could live on Twitter and live online. And that's really where I got my sense of self, where I got my sense of being. Having kids helped me have a little a big just distraction from all that, and realizing that is not my life. That is not what defines me, and that's not what matters. Hopefully people don't have to have kids to have that realization, but I needed to apparently. That was the lesson that I needed to learn from them. And that helped me a lot. I've been lucky enough to know some people in my life who have been far more quote unquote successful, who have reflected on that success and really talked about how it doesn't matter. Like, people say you have to grow. Like, you have to grow. You have to have a bigger head count. That's the true definition of success for a business. And who says you have to grow? Will Reynolds, someone that I follow, someone that I used to work with, I learned so much from him. He has an SEO company called Sear. And he did this wonderful video post about who says you have to grow. And I was like, that, and knowing him, I was just like, so right on. He always is about this stuff. People like that have really helped me to really understand this point, that success is how you define it. And nobody has to live in this life but you. It's your life to live. So if you're going to live by someone else's success, good luck. You're not probably going to be happy. You're going to have some unfulfilled things going on there.
Yeah.
So that's helped a lot. But I don't know if there's any one book or one resource that I could reference and say that this is the key. And
Yeah.
I'm still working on it too. Definitely. I want to do a lot of things in life, travel more and stuff. It all costs money. But for me, that's worth it. So it might not be a certain thing that I'm looking for success, but being able to do certain things is in my definition.
Yeah, Kyle, it really resonated when you were also talking about not caring as much about what others think anymore. Diana asked me for my birthday, how am I feeling turning 50? And I said, I don't know if it's because of the age or this midlife stage, but I've been reflecting, I'm probably past midlife, and this not caring as much anymore. I think that's what I told Diana. Like, now hitting 50, it's like, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to behave aligned with my values, not others, because I don't know about all of you ladies. I've started thinking, where do I want to be in the next 10, 20, 30 years? I'm not seeing myself going out to 100. I don't know, maybe, but I'm curious. Are all of you feeling a little bit like Kyle, where it's more now about what you want, what you view success, what your values are versus outside? Is this resonating with all of you like it is with me?
100%.
Yeah. Kyle, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, who would like to go next? Hey, it's my birthday. I'll choose.
Like,
Mary, we had talked about, we've more recently connected, but I've so admired your perspective on how you approach your life. I'm curious, when I gave you this assignment to think about your biggest lesson learned, where did you land?
That's a good question. And I do want to piggyback off some things that Kyle said. And it's funny how everything seems to come full circle when you're asked a question like this. If you're getting signals from the outside world and it's all like right there. And to start the conversation off, the signal that I received was a LinkedIn post that my cousin shared. And it was from Indeed. And I think this is so perfect for this conversation. It laid out four career stages. And I will share, I'm 53. And according to this, there's the exploration stage, the establishment stage, mid-career, 35 to 45, later career, 45 to 55, decline, 55 to 65. I'm like, shit, no, I'm just getting started. I think it's our job to reframe what society has placed on us, because being a parent, that was my full-time job. I had to balance parent, career, personal life. And so when I see something like that, my daughter's now off, done college, she's off into the world. Now it's my time. I'm not declining. I cannot say that enough. I feel like I'm starting to project and going upwards. So when I was given that assignment, aside from that, going back and reflecting, I had to be honest with you, my career has been very up and down in terms of not that straight line. It's been a very jagged. And I think those lessons within there have been so much more powerful because I haven't taken the straight and narrow. But the place where I learned the most is when I entered an unknown. I had hit rock bottom, for lack of a better word. I was a full-time photographer. I had my own business and I was engaged, going to get married. And lo and behold, that relationship ended very quickly. He cheated, but that's okay. It was one of those worst things, but it's best things because it forced me to look inward. What do I want? At the time, had an account with Lululemon. And so I went to Lululemon. I said, hey, I need to step out. I just need to do something fun because I needed to reassess. And as a parent, you need to make sure you've got your bases covered. And I did. Lo and behold, how would I know that was one of the best decisions of my life? Because working for Lululemon, if you know the company, yes, they sell athletic wear, but they also focus, what else can we give of each other? They really focus on career, life goals, and leadership skills. And one thing I really learned, and I think going back to what you were saying, Christine, I think this is what I show up as, I didn't realize it, is I really learned to create things in my life that otherwise wouldn't exist. Really leaning into the unknown and living into possibility. And that can be really scary, but that's where the unknown is, where the amazing stuff happens. But to get there, I actually will turn around and actually pull a frame out from the back that sits on my book stand over here. It's basically my goals for one of the times. Every year they make you do your goals. And within that, as you can see, there's Boston, that's home, but you have an MBA there. So when I actually left Lululemon, I went and got my MBA because that's what was in my goals. I mapped it out. Every year I didn't have to achieve everything, but it allowed me to look at my future self and say what was possible without looking at things being so scary. So that was a big life lesson there, was learning how to live in the unknown and create what was not possible, what I thought was possible, and living into possibility. And
Can
then the
I
second,
ask you something,
yeah.
Mary? Because so much of what you said just resonated, and then I'll let you get to the next one. But I had wondered, a couple of things really spoke to me in what you were sharing. The first was you took a jagged approach to your career and tried many different areas of what did you want to be? Where did you want to take your career? You took risks.
Yes.
And you mentioned that by doing that, jumping around and taking the jagged approach, you really have gotten to a point where you learned a lot, you grew, you had opportunities to fail. I'm curious your take. You also talked about the notion of by taking risks, it's very scary. And I'd love to get your tips on making that leap even when it is scary. And the reason is our career trajectories have been very different. I don't perceive my career as having been jumping from different types of opportunities to learn what I liked. My career has been all things tech, product, and UX since I was 26 years old.
Yep.
And now I've realized, I don't know who else has ever realized, this was a path I took. And I liked part of it, but it's not my full identity. And it's not everything that I'd like to bring to my life and career. And now, since I did not hop around as much, it feels very scary to say, you know what, I'm removing that identity of being that product UX expert and figuring out what's next. And I'm curious, do you have advice?
Yeah, so the lesson I learned, again, going back to Lululemon, I was part of a team that started a brand within a brand. So it was Aviva, the young girls line. I was part of the initial team, the first 5, and we grew that to 22 stores around the country. And with that, we were left to ourselves to do all the things you're supposed to do in a business and take the risks, learn quickly, assess, have the meltdown call. But we had the mothership to actually catch us. Okay. So it allowed us to take those risks that you all read about and all the rags and all the industry and everything. But what I learned to that is when I say I had the mothership to fall back on, it's not that I had the higher entity of the company. What I had was people. I had relationships. I had a community. And so for folks there's 2 things that I had, that community and those relationships, which goes back to my other lesson I learned, was having relationships and community within your space, whatever that looks like, allows you to take those risks. And then the other thing, when going back to that jagged career trajectory, I would have to say, even though it's jagged in surface out, when it looks outward in, there's also a theme. I notice there's themes underlying there. I'm always trying to lift up women. I'm in a training space at a lot of my entities, and I find myself always pushing the envelope and living in possibilities, finding your theme. And that's why I'm a visual person, aka the photography. So you see all the themes coming through, And sometimes in life, I remember working for Lululemon, my first doing the goals. I was in a bad place. I was like, I can't look at myself in 10 years, and that's too scary. So I broke it down to 3 months, 6 months, a year. So really sitting down and doing the work was another lesson there, was taking the risk. And anything in life, risk is scary, but who's your parachute? Who's your friends? Who's your family? There's a community out there that wants to connect with you more than you realize. So
Yep.
whatever that
I
mothership
wrote
looks
that
like,
down.
yeah.
And it
So
goes back to what you've taught me, that this group has taught me, that others have taught. It's about the relationships, right? And you don't have to go it alone, and the community and the connection.
yep.
Thank
that
you,
is so
Mary.
true.
I had interrupted because I had so many questions. You had another lesson learned.
It feeds right into your question. So we played really
Okay.
well off each other. Is the other life lessons was living in possibility, doing the goals. And the other thing is within that, there was that connection and relationship. That's the other life lesson. But within that, I would have to say, I would be remiss without mentioning we all are leaders in this group. We're all showing up. And it is a learned skill to perfect your leadership. And when you develop those relationships and connections, your leadership gets better because people can give you honest feedback. So I think that was living with that mentality of above the line, below the line. And we had this rule in Lululemon is you have a conversation with somebody. We all do that. We call it back of house conversation. And because you're in such good relationship with folks, you could say to that person, hey, here's my advice, but I'm gonna hold you accountable to that. Make sure you go tell that person how you're feeling, and I'll give you 3 days to do it, and I'll check in with you. But we would develop such relationships with folks. That high level feedback loop was really valuable. And that's leadership. We have to learn that. I think people think leadership is this innate thing. There's somewhat innate going on, but there's a leadership that we have to hold each other accountable and grow and develop together. And that starts with, I feel, connections and relationships. So
Yep.
that's what I'll have.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary. Diana, Stephanie, who would like to go next? Diana?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I've had a couple of inflection points in my life, big upheavals, but I'll focus on the most recent one because it was a pretty big one. So about 2 years ago, as I was wrapping up my divorce, the startup that I had joined because I thought it was going to be a huge success and an opportunity that looked like a perfect fit for me and a great culture, had their first round of layoffs. And it became very clear to me that the reasons we got to that first round of layoffs were things we were not going to be course correcting from, and that we would very likely have a second round in the future, and that second round would certainly see me and my team being laid off. And to be clear, I have spent most of my career trying to avoid layoffs, and successfully. And any whiff of financial anything or acquisition, I'd be out the door and moving on. But one of the mantras as I was going through my divorce was there's no way out but through. And so when it became clear to me that we were probably heading towards another layoff, it was just a question of when. We hoped for the best, but there were no indications that we would be successful in avoiding it. And in fact, we were not. We had the second round came for us. My instinct was to get another job right away, to avoid the layoff. I'm a single mother, get the job, move on. But because I was really sitting with everything that was going on and really taking the time to feel the feelings and see what's going on and see how it was impacting me, I realized I was too overwhelmed. This was not the time to look for another job. And so I made the decision to stay and support my team and take the pause afterwards, take whatever package we got and take a minute to just reassess. Because I have been in this career that I loved for 25 years. And it seemed like a good time to just take this gift of a package whenever it came, and then take the time off. And so that was really that was huge growth for me. Just sitting with things, especially with these big changes. I know I'm going to lose my job. I could see that coming for the 6 months that it was between first layoff and second layoff. And similarly, I could see my divorce coming as well. And so there's a lot of just rumination or worry, or the unknown is so vast financially, emotionally, geographically. I didn't know if we were going to have to move house, all these things. And I did spend some time working those because that way I could have a plan when the inevitable came, but really just focused on each step. What do I need to do today? Okay. what can I do to move things forward? What does my team need from me? What does my daughter need from me? And really just getting through it. But by being like really in it and focusing on what's going on, seeing where I was at, seeing when I needed more rest or more community or whatever it is that I needed, taking that, making sure that everybody around me had what they needed too, and that I could deliver whatever it was along the way. And so that was really, that was really my big mantra and my big focus, just really being with things as they're happening and focusing on the things that you can control and the steps you have to take and doing those things, because you can't get to the other side until you've gone through it.
Mhm.
So those steps all move you closer to the other side, but you got to get there.
Thank you, Diana. And while you were sharing your story, and thank you, I know it wasn't fun being in the midst as you're
The
trying to get
worst.
to the other side. What really strikes me about your story, and it's also what struck me, as I mentioned, the last couple of years, the growth of connecting more deeply with people. When I've connected with all of you and others, what I've noticed is that you can't tell, and this might not seem, it was an epiphany for me. When I think people are thriving, and we talk about this all the time, what looks like thriving and abundance, whatever that means internally and what's happening in someone's life may not be. And it really resonates. You're at the startup, you're still going strong. And this was the hardest period for you. Whereas I also see from society, when some of us, like you, pause and take a break to grow and learn and figure out what's next, oftentimes that's the period where externally people will say, "Are you okay?" And I'm
It's true.
curious,
Yeah.
I see the growth you've had, and going from that experience in the startup to where you are now, I'm curious, when did you get more of the questions from external folks about how are things and are you okay? Was it
Oh,
when you had the
yeah.
job or not? And
Yeah, well,
why?
so for a variety of reasons, I was not telling people about my divorce, in part because it was a slow burn. There was a lot that had been going on for quite a bit of time. And when we actually initiated it and it was official and we were moving forward on that, I was working for someone who later left. It wasn't a good situation. And basically, had he known that I was going through that, that would have been used against me. And so I actually I didn't even tell my own team until I got closer. And so once he left the company, I did let my team know, just because it was like, okay, so there's going to be some days where things are going to get a little wonky. I may have to move, or he's going to move. I'm going to need some time here and there. And then eventually I did tell my then new boss, who was one of the founders, hey, just this is going on. I'm going to need a day off while the movers come to take my ex-husband's stuff. And I did get the question from him then, but it was like, yeah, no, now this is the easy part. Once he's out of the house, that's easy, relatively speaking. So it's true. I didn't get a lot of the questions. But I think also that's because sometimes you can't handle having those questions when you're really going through it, right? So the people who were close to me knew, although I was quite close to the people that worked for me, they didn't know until much later. Yeah, you get the questions later.
Yeah.
You don't get them, because I also mask it quite well. Like no one would have known. And yeah, I although it's funny, once you've been laid off, like divorce, people feel like it's contagious. But I think the layoff is the same thing. People don't want to have that, that stink on them. So a lot of people will actually, in both situations, pull away. But I think that, like Mary was talking about, that's the gift, right? Like when someone tells you who they are, they cheat on you, they don't show up for you when you need them. Like it's self-selection and it's useful.
Absolutely.
Like I know who's my support team and who's not. And, it's useful.
Diana, I don't know if you saw, Tina had your points resonated. Tina mentioned in the chat, focus on the things you can control, and feeling your feelings first really resonates as well. That resonated with me. Going back to what Kyle started with, that I was thinking about, Diana, as you were speaking, figuring out during those difficult times what your notion of success and abundance is. Like what's so fascinating to me, when the external world has thought I've been thriving the most, when abundance was about generating revenue. To be honest, society often focuses on that piece. Those oftentimes, and I'm curious for all of you ladies, it's the abundance isn't always tied to revenue. Some of my darkest times were when the revenue was coming in ways I had never seen. And back to Diana, you said the gift of when people show you who you
Mhm.
are. Sometimes people go away when you're in your best life. I
Mhm.
feel like it's
Oh,
very
yeah.
difficult to know from the outside when people are in a place of abundance or scarcity.
This does drive people away, right? It depends on what the dynamic of your relationship with. It happens with people who lose weight or once they have kids. If there's something that you have that is causing jealousy in another person for whatever reason, that's not on you, but that will make them uncomfortable when you've changed or when you've grown. And if it's an unhealthy dynamic, people prefer to see you as you were when they had the most control over you. And so sometimes that growth pushes them away, that abundance, because then you're not the person that they can have that dynamic with. And so I think, also a gift.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you so much, Diana. I appreciate the lessons. And Stephanie, I'd love to hear what you're going to share.
First of all, getting to hear everybody first, I'm like, my head is like a bobblehead. So when Kyle said learning how to say that doesn't work for me, that is like so much part of my story. And when Diana talked about doing the next thing and people want you to be what they were when they had the most control over you, and Mary talking about having lots of different career lines, but also that leadership is something you can grow. The way this all comes together is about 13 years ago, I had to quit my job because I was ill. So I had spent 7 years getting a PhD. I had spent 7 more years in my field, and all of a sudden I couldn't work. And I had to spend a really long time in therapy understanding that who I am and what my specialty profession, whatever was, were not the same thing, because it was already my third kind of direction, but I'd spent a lot of time working on it. And to unlearn how your personal identity and your professional identity are not, your worth is not tied up in what your profession is, was a really long, hard, worthwhile lesson, but it wasn't easy. And it's not like I was making a lot of money. It wasn't. But I had put so much investment into being where I was that it was very hard to separate that. And as Mary has, so since then, I've had a lot of different ways to go, right? So learning that, first of all, I can start new things and pursue it for a while and then change my mind. That has been a big one. Learning that everything that came before can be part of what I'm doing now. So that very first job I had, which was as an assistant, and then when the next one, which was like the 23-year-old, like I was in PR in high tech agency where the pressure is really way too much for a 23-year-old, all the way to a degree and just my understanding of the world is all a continuum, all that you can draw on all of that for whatever it is that you choose to do next. And one of those things, and so this is, Mary, what you were saying, is I started a leadership development course coaching company. And we're starting like next week. And so all of a sudden, nothing was happening. And all of a sudden, it all needs to happen right now. And what I was writing this morning was an introductory podcast where we talk about what our philosophy is. And it is that leadership is a series of actions. It is not an innate quality that you either have or you don't have. And it's something that you can learn. And it's something that the more that you see other people as human and have compassion for them, the better your leadership will be and the better your team will be. So like hearing Mary basically say the same thing as I was really putting into words and recording today, like it's a reminder that you can, I'm 52, you can still learn new things. And also the things that you knew before worthwhile. For my podcast, I interviewed a guy I've looked up to for years. He's one of the biggest experts in the kind of politics I do today. And I interviewed him, and I just started this podcast thing a year and a half ago. So I'm like, am I any good at this? Is anybody listening? And to have somebody that I have on more of a pedestal, maybe just because he's older, I don't know, to think that what I was thinking had value was a really somebody who's out there telling people what to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thinking about what I was thinking valuable, just a really nice way to think maybe I can do this.
Yep. Yep.
Because like still got the end. Yes.
Oh, you totally can do this too. I come
can
to you for
do it,
leadership
but is it
coaching all the time. You are fantastic. And we all know that too. I just have a sticky based on what you said. I have stickies around my room. UX folks love sticky notes, but just take action. And what
Right.
you were saying, leadership is a series of actions. I listened to a podcast recently that aligns with that, where they were saying, just do that thing. Don't talk about that thing. Don't plan that thing. Don't put together deadlines for that thing before you've done that action or thing. Don't talk to people all the time about it. Don't read books to research. And Stephanie, you're highlighting this. And career pivots, life pivots. I don't know how all of you've been feeling. I have gotten into that cycle sometimes of talking to people about all of my great ideas, putting together my project plan with my timelines, talking oftentimes with you ladies about here's all my grandiose plans. But pivots are, back to what you've all said, pivots are scary and there's fear there. And it's much easier to talk and deliberate versus act. And I wondered, Stephanie, what I'm trying to do is get out of the project planning all the time to just do what I know I have to do to get to the next step. When you said, and with your courses, and when you said leadership is a series of actions, do you have tips for getting out of your mind and just doing it? It's hard.
Tips for that. That's hard. So I learned that by not working for 7 years, and then just when something presented itself that wasn't, it was a cousin's business and she hadn't been like paying attention to her payroll and she needed someone to like just give her like some Excel spreadsheets. And I started that way. And just starting something gives you the impetus to keep going. This goes back to my dissertation. People were like, well, why did you get your PhD, or why did you finish your dissertation? Because I started it. And at some point you get so far along that it's too much to stop doing it. You're giving up too much of what you've invested. And so you just keep going.
Yep.
Which is why also it was so hard to do the pivot that I did. And that pivot had they were partial pivots. It was like, help the cousin. It's, oh, maybe I like to do some websites. You do websites for a while. Oh, maybe I would like to do blah. And like, it was all little tiny pivots.
Yeah, this resonates, Stephanie. And Kyle mentioned this, and Tina, the courage associated with doing this. You also talked about the little steps, and Tina was talking about doing small experiments, being an experimental leader, like all of this, the little steps matter along the way, every daily little step. That really resonates as well. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. This was way beyond what I hope for lessons learned. There was something I've thought about a lot too, in terms of, I mentioned the connection we've had. There's something that you've all touched upon, that like in these inflection points, pausing, reflecting, you've all done that, reflecting on where you've been. The big lesson learned for me about how it is about relationships and connection and not going it alone. The other one I've had early 2023 was where I had a wake-up call, because the only way I could describe it was that from 2016 to 2023, I was in survival mode. Business was great, so it wasn't that abundance, but survival mode. I had my kiddo 2016, and I was just raising my son, bringing in the work, whatever work came, I wasn't really proactively thinking about it. It was just go. And then 2023 hit. Pandemic was not winding down, but we had gone through the pandemic, and my son was old enough now that I could think about me again. And 2023 hit, and I'm curious for attendees, but also for all of you, 2023 hit for me, and I asked myself, am I going in the direction that I'd like? And I finally had the time and space to admit to myself, no. And I had thriving years work-wise. My son was doing great, but for me, it was a no. And I didn't know what to do with that. I'm curious. So all of these lessons learned, I'd say the biggest thing that helped me was when I realized that, not jumping into my next project, finding my next client, but Diana, you spoke to this, pausing, taking a break and thinking about things. And that's been two things that have been most helpful. Reconnecting with you ladies, meeting consistently. What I haven't shared with the attendees, we meet every other week to talk through our next steps and what we're doing. That level of connection has been so amazing for me. The other area is taking a pause and taking a look back. Many of you spoke to therapy. I've been going through new types of therapy, one EMDR therapy, which is all about before you move to the next step, you want to understand the narratives and stories that got you here. Before jumping forward, you better understand what story and identity you've had tied to yourself so you can either revisit that narrative and reframe it or move forward in another way. So it's really been about, for me, understanding why I've gotten to where I am before I move forward. And that's been so helpful. And that's a theme I've heard from all of you, just taking the time to reflect what you all want next. Does that seem to be where you're all at, or does that resonate at all?
Yeah, because that
That's hope.
busyness can distract you, right? Like we all have to be busy because we're parents and we have financial obligations and we have careers that we're trying to move forward. And that busyness doesn't give you a lot of space to think. Had I not been laid off, I would still be there. But I was planning on staying at that startup for 4 or 5 years, which is forever in startup time.
Yeah.
And I would have kept going. I would not have taken this pause and maybe pivoted. I wouldn't have expected that I would be pivoting, but that's what's happening. And I'm taking a look around and it's, what do I want to do? So yeah, it just, you have to have that pause.
And I think a lot of times that pause is not self-driven. I think that pause is inflicted on you at some points where you've come up against some sort of barrier, health, layoff, whatever, and then you really have to think about it because you have to choose a direction. Or you choose 5 directions, but sometimes you don't just get to say, I'm going to pause right now and think about what I really want to do. It's
You never
boom,
get to
like
say that. You have too many obligations,
No.
right?
No, I had wondered, this is a request for attendees who are here so we can learn as well. Like we were talking, the ladies here, we were talking about some of our lessons learned. I was hoping, coming into hearing our themes, if there's other lessons you all have had, it's unfair to ask, but in a sentence or two in the chat window, if you could share that, that would be incredibly helpful for me. And the hope was a little teaser. This was our first time as our group tackling some of the questions and issues. Like I mentioned, we're all meeting bi-weekly to talk about these issues, but it's the first time publicly we have. And I'd love to hear from you the lessons you've learned and also topics you'd like to hear more about, because we're planning on doing more of these. A couple of final details before we go. First, I wanted to highlight, because this comes up quite a bit, June in the chat window is talking about a lot of what we've talked about, and it's come up in all of our stories, is that it's scary to take the time to think about where you are, where you've been, and where you're going. And I've heard that theme, and it actually makes me feel better hearing that we're all scared, and it is very scary, and we're acknowledging that fear now. And that's something that I think is huge about these inflection points and pivots, is feel those feelings and feel that fear because it's going to be there. If any of you want to come on, I made it capable for you to share your video. If you want to come on and wave now, I promise you won't be on YouTube.